and then I'll go into some examples. I'll give a Python example and a JavaScript example, and we'll go over some code. After the design talk, I'll also be going over an iOS app. So we'll create an iOS app with an Evernote integration. So let's get started. Just giving an overview, we have a lot of SDKs. So the possible SDKs you could use for web apps are Ruby, Python, JavaScript. We recently added a Node.js app, Node.js SDK. JavaScript was challenging to add for Evernote. We only recently added it. It's really popular, though a lot of apps have already started using Node.js. It is challenging to add because of Thrift. Thrift does the marshalling, unmarshalling, and because it's a binary protocol, JavaScript didn't have support for byte arrays, and we had trouble getting over that. But now we use array buffers in JavaScript to do the marshalling and unmarshalling. So any of these SDKs, there's a ... because we have more. I didn't list all of them. These are the popular ones. So when you're developing for the web and you want to make an Evernote integration, or you want to make an Evernote app, there are a couple of there are three options. You can either make a web app. Just a thing to note here, in web apps, we don't support cross-site origin requests. Who knows cross-site origin requests? Okay, so I'll explain it a little bit. Basically, you're not allowed to make requests to a different domain unless the API supports the cross-site origin request headers. So we don't support those headers right now, so you can't really build a client-side Chrome app. If you really want to make a web app, you would have to do the Evernote API interaction on the server side and just do the UI on the client. Or you could make a Chrome extension which allows cross-site origin requests. So you can use the Chrome extension. The other thing is a mobile app that allows cross-site origin requests as well. For example, Windows Phone has JavaScript capabilities, so you could use that. You can use PhoneGap. Who's heard of PhoneGap? So you can use PhoneGap. We have a PhoneGap example that uses a JavaScript SDK. So PhoneGap basically converts any JavaScript app into a native application for Windows and like few other platforms, iOS, Android. I think BlackBerry as well. Yeah, so surprisingly. So our API doesn't have any rate limits as of now. In a few weeks there will be a rate limit, but the rate limit is not really to prevent you from using the API. It's just so that you're not using the API, you're not abusing the API. So we don't want you to be polling the API every second. So that's what the rate limiting is going to prevent. So if you're not polling and you want to watch for changes, what do you use? We have something called webhooks, which basically you give us this base URL using our dev website, and whenever there is a change in the Evernote account, we will call this base URL with the user ID that changed the note, the note identifier, and if the note was created or updated. So it's a really nice tool to have for an app, because it can make of really interesting use cases, like you want to do something based on whether a note has a certain tag. You can do that using webhooks. You want to monitor the changes of a note, you can do that using webhooks. So webhooks is really useful. If you're making web apps, you should definitely look into this. It's really simple. You just give us the base URL and we'll call you every time there's a change in the note, in the entire account of the user. So I'll be showing some code very soon, but if you want to try our Ruby SDK, I've written a course on Code Academy, which is Who's done Code Academy courses? Okay. So have you seen the Evernote API? Okay, so we have an Evernote API course on Code Academy. So if you want to try a Ruby SDK, you could do that. You can test in Chrome. I'll show you how. Or you could set up your local web server and do that. Deploying your web app, there are multiple options. We like AWS, it's pretty good. It does the scaling for you. If you're creating a web app and you expect a lot of users to use it, it's a good way to do that. And it charges you only for the scale that you use it for. So, and if you participate in DevCup, you get free AWS credits as well. So you might get some free server resources. I have some examples of how to host an Evernote app on AWS. I'll share a note with all of you after the workshop on how to do that. Heroku, actually Heroku runs on top of AWS, but it's just simpler to use. So you could use Heroku as well. Of course, like if it's a mobile app, just App Store, or if you want, just host it yourself. You could start off that way actually by hosting it yourself, and then if you see a large uptake of users, you could move to AWS. So AWS Beanstalk is what you have to use to host it. There are some steps on a Python Django example. You just follow those steps, take the Evernote sample for Django and replace it with this. And then you'll have a fully functioning Evernote app, which you could modify. But if you already have a Django app and you're adding an Evernote integration, then you don't need to do all this. I just want to talk about them because they're a recent success. They made a web app which is completely based on leveraging the Evernote platform. Posh-IO, they're recently featured on TechCrunch. They recently, just last week, I think they came down to our office as well to meet with us. What they do is they convert a notebook into a blog. So you can write notes in a notebook, and they watch for tags. And if you put a tag saying published, it pushes it out to a website. So you can have your own domain name, or they provide domain names as well. And you basically get a blog out of your Evernote notebook. So it's a really popular integration, and it's a great way to make a web app. That's just a debug note. I'll talk about that later. I'll show you some code now. The laptop doesn't go all the way there, so I'm going to be sitting here and showing you. Okay, so let's see where to get the docs. So the main place to get the docs is from. Okay, not able to. So the main place to get docs from is the reference doc. So like I spoke about the note store in the first talk. So that's what matches the note store. So now that makes a little bit sense to you since you know what the note store is. And those are all the APIs that you can use against the note store. So creating notebooks, user store. You'll never use the authenticate function because you're going to use OAuth. You'll never directly call authenticate. You can use check user info or get user to get the information on the user. And then these are all the types that are defined. There are notes and note attributes and all that. Let me know if you have any questions about this, but I'll go into a code example now. So I'll show you a Python code example first. Let me So this is there in our SDK, in our Python SDK. So firstly, you need to import a bunch of things that you will need. EDAM means that's the short form for the Evernote data structure. So it's basically the thrift types. So you need to import the types since you will be creating a note. So note is a type, so you'll need that, and note store types as well. So the auth token here. So this is an important thing to note. So since we are in this example, we are not using OAuth. So if you just want to test the API out first, you can use something, and you don't want to deal with OAuth. You can use something called the dev token, which provides you access to just your account. So,
I can use the API without
sorry?
I can use the API without authenticate the user?
Yeah, you can, but only to see notes in your account. Yeah.
No.
Sorry?
Public knowledge.
No, any notes in your account. You have full access to your account, of course. So we give you a dev token that you can use to access your account. So the way you get it is just by going to that link. This example is there on our GitHub website. So you can just go to that link and it will give you a dev token. You just paste that dev token in here. And that's pretty much it to run this example. So I'll just show you what this sample does first. So it checks the API version, lists all the notebooks, and creates a note in the default notebook. And after it does that, it finds the note that was just created and just prints out the GUID. So let's see how that was done. So user store, we saw that in the beginning. It's to get information about the user. So we've wrapped around most of the things in the SDK because we don't want you to be dealing with the thrift complexities. So we have an object called Evernote client, which takes the auth token. And someone was asking me before this talk, like, how do I convert from sandbox to production once I'm done? So basically, you just, in this case, you just turn that flag to false, and you activate your key on production, and then this same example will work on production. So that's all you need to do for this example. Basically, what that does is once that's false, the URL changes from sandbox.evernote.com to evernote.com. It's not like complicated. So, but in this example, just turn that to false, and it'll hit evernote.com. So we're calling APIs now. So once we get the user store from the client, now we have the user store endpoint. Now we can call APIs on the user store. So we can call check version, and we're passing some parameters there. So again, the place to see what those parameters are is the API documentation. So the function was check version. So it'll probably be there in the user store. There it is. And these are the parameters you need to pass, which is what we are sending in. And then it just prints out the user store. That was an example of using the user store. Note store is same thing. You get the note store from the Evernote client, and you list the notebooks. So let's see the documentation for list notebooks as well, because there's one difference in what's going on here. So in this case, list notebooks takes one parameter, authentication token. But since we have that Evernote client, which we already passed the token to, we don't need to keep passing the token every time. So since you're calling it on the wrapper function, which is why the SDK is useful. You can just say list notebooks without anything because you already passed the token and it'll give you all the notebooks. If you look at the return type, it's a list. And again, for what Thrift does is for each language, it will generate the corresponding data type for this list. So it'll be an NS array in Objective-C and an array in Java and so on. So that's all done by Thrift, so you don't need to worry about that. But if you look at the API documentation and you see a list and you start to wonder what's going on, this is just a generic documentation, and then for each language there'll be some kind of data structure linked to that. So creating a note. So now we imported the types data structure. So we are using that to create a new note. How do you know what properties a note has? You go to the dev types that I showed you, and there'll be types and note, and these are all the properties of a note that you can set. So content will be the Evernote markup language, so ENML. You have to provide a title. You can provide resources, which we're going to do now because we want to create a note which has a photo in it. So how do you attach a resource to a note? In this case, an image. So there are two things you need to do. You need to add a resource to the note resources. So the note resources is basically an array of resources. You can add multiple ones, 0 or more. In this case, we're just going to add one, so it's just one resource. We make a resource and we attach some data to it, which is the image, and we specify the MIME type of the image, saying that this is a PNG. We need to provide a body hash for the resource. It's just an MD5 hash, and when you are if you just do that, the note will have an image attached to it. It will have an attachment, but it won't show in the note. That's because you haven't added it in the Evernote markup language yet. So if you want it to show in the note itself, then you need to add it to the Evernote markup language, which is the note's content, which is next. So that's the NML there. We support UTF-8. The root tag is ENNote. ENMedia is the tag for an image. You specify that's a PNG. The only difference is that you need to specify a hash here as well, but that's not the MD5 hash. It's the hex representation of the MD5 hash. So it's just a little nuance there that you need to give the hash hacks, because this is XML and hex goes well with XML. So it's better to provide a hex hash there. In each of our SDKs, there's an example on how to create a photo node, because this is not like it's not totally easy to do, but once you get it, it's straightforward. So if you add this ENMedia tag with the right hash, the image will show up in the node. So what's up?
Have you a limit size?
For the image? I don't believe there is a size limit. Even if there is, it's pretty big. I think each note has a size limit, but it's pretty big. So I can look that up and let you know. But you can put really big images in there. It'll just affect performance, nothing else. Any other question?
Very good one. Can you repeat that part when you get the hash, the original hash, before you hexify?
Yeah. So So we're using, yeah. So we're using an MD5 library to do that. No problem. So yeah, that's where we get the hash, and then we just hexify it. And then you want to create a node, so you're going to use the node store endpoint, just called create node, and just pass it the node. Again, if you look up the documentation, the first parameter will be an authentication token, but in this case we are passing it through the Evernote client, so we don't need to. Couple of things here. There's a node filter where you can filter based on basically you can think there are two things. There's a result spec and the filter. So if you look up node filter, you can specify things like words that it should match. Like if you want to search through the notes and only match few words, this is a good way to search. You can specify that you want to only look into a specific notebook. Tags. Inactive means that if it's inactive, that means it's in the trash. So if it's not inactive, then it's a valid node. And the result spec basically is an optimization, so that you can tell the API exactly what you need. So if all you need is the node title, you can just say that result spec include title. That's it. If you want the content as well, you have to say include content equals 1. So that's just an optimization so that you don't waste bandwidth on your calls. Yeah, so that's it for the Python SDK. This does not have OAuth. If you want to use OAuth, we have a Django sample as well, which you have to deploy on some kind of either your own web server or AWS to use. But we do have a sample that you can just use and test it out. I'll be showing you a JavaScript sample with OAuth, but so do you get the idea of node store and user store? Any questions? Yeah?
Without the SDK, I can use RESTful or RESTful website?
No. So Evernote is not a REST API. You can't use curl to call APIs like other APIs. That's because we chose Thrift. Thrift is a binary protocol, and we don't have RESTful endpoints. Like someone could create a RESTful endpoint. Like you can create a REST interface and then use the Evernote SDK to call into the Evernote APIs, so that way it's become a REST API. But we don't have one yet. We don't plan to in the near future because you can still make apps relatively easily using these SDKs, especially with the dev token. You don't have to go through OAuth to do that. You just you can call into APIs pretty easily. And you can also test in Chrome. I'll be showing you a JavaScript example in which you can test in Chrome as well. So that's another option. Any other question? So all of the SDKs will have a similar structure. You'll have some kind of an Evernote client where you get the node store from, you get the user store from, and then you call APIs on that. It's as simple as that. You create objects, you create nodes, you create node attributes, and then you just call the API.
Any type of resource?
Any type of resource, yeah. Can be audio, zip files, whatever. Yeah, anything. It might not show up in the note. Like if you attach binary data, it won't show up in the node, but you can still attach files to it of any kind. So this basically is running on my sandbox, so it must have created a note in my sandbox account. "12 minutes ago," so that's the node it created with an Evernote logo. So let's go into the JavaScript. I'm going to run through this a little quickly. So to run the JavaScript, you have two options. You either run it in the so this is what I was talking about. We don't support cross-origin resource sharing yet, but you can test in the browser. You just open Chrome using this command, and you can test the APIs in the browser. But to deploy it, generally you would deploy this in the server using Node.js, or like I said, some kind of web app in a mobile environment. So I'm just trying to look for okay, there we go. So this is an example of JavaScript. If you need this example, let me know. I can give it to you. I basically converted our PhoneGap example that's there on GitHub to something that runs in Chrome, so that I can show it to you guys. So don't see my consumer secret, but basically this is where you give a consumer secret and a key, because you're doing OAuth in this case, and callback URL is given because so I'll show you the example. So I clicked on login, and because I was already logged in into Sandbox, it just gave me this page which says reauthorize. So when I click on reauthorize, it needs to go back to a URL. That's the callback URL that you specify, so that this link knows where to go to let you know that the authorization is complete. So that listed the first notebook that I have in my Sandbox account and created a note. If I go into my personal account, there's a new note there. So let's look at the code once again. I think that opened in Text Wrangler. Okay. So in this case, I'm creating the note store myself. Like I'm using the thrift binary protocol and the transport to create a note store, and then calling APIs on the note store. So that Evernote client object is not there in this case, so I have to create the note store myself. But we have sample code, so you just copy this code for creating a note store and then call APIs on that. Like you can see, I have to pass the auth token here myself, which I didn't have to in the other SDK. So those are the small differences between the SDKs, but this JavaScript SDK is great. It still works really well. Yeah, any questions about the JavaScript SDK? I can give you this sample, whoever needs it. It basically does the OAuth, all the 3 or 4 steps of OAuth, and comes back and then lets you create a node. Yeah. So you can't write a complete client-side web application right now because we don't support cores, but it works in PhoneGap. It can work in Windows apps. Windows apps support JavaScript. iOS, if you write a web app on iOS, that is JavaScript. That works. You can create Node.js apps, like I said, on the server side.
The callback, for example, I have a local file in Evernote redirect to my file or
Yes, to whatever you give it in the call.
if I have the web app with mobile compatible.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, so in case of a mobile app, what you would do is you would keep track of where it's redirecting and catch it there, catch the auth token there. If you see the phone gap example I have on GitHub, you'll see that. Yeah. But yeah, you just have to have set up a delegate which basically tells you when the URL changes and listen to the URL changes, and when you get that URL, you get the auth token from there.
Sorry, when you're talking about SDK for JavaScript, we can use any framework related with JavaScript, right?
Yeah, anything that works with JavaScript, which is a lot of frameworks. Yeah.
Still Node.js, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a Node.js SDK. So Node uses npm modules, and we have a module named Evernote. Simple enough. So if you import that module, and we have a Node.js sample app using Express, which is the web framework for routing. So we have a sample for that as well.
That SDK have a compatibility with jQuery or other one?
So I think we are independent of jQuery, but it's compatible with if you're using jQuery, it'll still work.
So one is good for the client side and the other one for the server side, right?
Yes. Yeah. Client side, but in a constrained framework, like it has to be a mobile app or phone gap or something like that.
PHP framework. I use Symfony framework.
Yeah, we have a PHP SDK as well. Yeah. Almost all popular languages. And the good thing about Thrift is that if there is a language that it's a new language and there is no SDK for it, our Thrift framework is open source. You can generate code for any language you want. So, cool. All right. So Chris will be talking about design, and after that, I'll create an iOS app and integrate the Evernote SDK. It takes about 10 minutes generally to write a full app from start to finish. Thank you.